The story of Dondi, a little war orphan found cold and starving by two kind-hearted GIs. They feed him and treat him with affection. For the first time in his life, Dondi has a home and finds real happiness. But then, suddenly, the bottom drops out of his world. Word comes that his GI buddies are to be sent back to America, but the resourceful lad hides aboard a troop ship. After an arduous journey, the little refugee secretly enters the United States. I know you, big lady. You Miss America.
I was born in Harlem. I weighed 1.25 pounds. 1.25 pounds, and the doctor at the hospital, the women's hospital in New York, said if he survives, he'll be a genius. But he said, don't count on it. My earliest memory was when my mother and father, after I was born, after about 2 years, began to measure me up against the wall. You never forget a thing like that. Why are they measuring me? And I think it stayed with me. My father came from Russia. He came from the old country where you have a son and you put him out in the fields to work. And he was a little nonplussed by having a little son. My parents, whenever they moved 4 or 5 times a year. Terrible. And they'd put me in a little room in the back of the apartment. And I'd sit there with the radio. The radio was my lifeblood. And I'd sit with my drawing board in a lonely room. I don't know how the hell I did it. I don't know. When you think about it, most cartoonists did it. A lonely room. The cartoonists are like little children, even when they're 80. They're like children. They're old children. They've never lost the spell of being young. Cartoonists. Even the word cartoonist is a funny word. I collected the most beautiful bunch of friends, not being in the business world, but being cartoonists. I was there at the beginning. I just walked into it with a little kid with a portfolio. And that's how the whole thing started. That's how the world started. I wanted to be loved by everybody, unquote, even women. I was doing everything a little guy does to prove that he's tall. I was always aware that I was short, and I used to wear elevator shoes. We had a terrible family life, awful, just disgusting, terrible. That's probably why I may have been crippled a little bit about getting married, having family and all that. I was never able to get close. And now that I'm 90 years old, it doesn't matter anymore. So what? But the point is, I don't even feel sorry. I don't even think I missed anything. That's what's scary. And that's what's a little sad. Because maybe I did lead a lonely life. I don't think so. Maybe Dondi was a part of me, and I was Dondi. And the kid, I use the word the kid. It's like I was going to say my kid. I look at him as though he's my kid, like a little son of mine, you see? It was like I never had a real family. My parents, my grandparents, they fought and screamed a lot. When you're surrounded by anger and depression all the time, To survive, you find ways to escape. I think I wanted to become an entertainer to make them laugh or even love me. Maybe that's why I became a cartoonist, to make them laugh. We lived all together in a little house in Bensonhurst, and we had a chauffeur and his wife. His wife was our cook, and I could never understand the dichotomy of living in a two-story white stucco little house and having a chauffeur, liveried chauffeur. And that's how we lived for about 5 years, 10 years maybe. My grandfather was a very wealthy man, furniture dealer. He owned the building down on 315 Grand Street, and a 6-story building. And while I was typing letters to his sister in Boston, I would be learning how to type. That's why I learned how to type. I was 5 years old. And I used to hear noises from the upstairs. It was my grandfather stripping the female customers on the 6th floor, the mattresses. He was in the furniture business, and I often wondered about that sound, the noise. My grandfather had great taste. This is his ring, who I took off his finger when he was dead, when he died. So the undertaker shouldn't take it, because I love that bastard. I use the word bastard lovingly. Any guy who goes on the 6th floor and screws his customers is okay with me. And then the Depression hit us. The Depression wiped out my grandfather's business, and we became poor. And there's nothing worse than to have it all and lose it all. So we moved to New York City, 110th Street, and that was the beginning of my ill-fated childhood. It was a miserable time of a human being's life as a young person, because the screaming about money never stopped.
Long time no see.
Well, good to see you.
The first time I met IRWIN, I was just, kind of surprised, because he's a very short little guy, and he was always drawing these great big heroes and everything.
IRWIN was one of the guys really in that first wave who were developing the idiom of what the comic book was going to be. And then as comic books arrived, some of the early artists began to play with composing the page, began to break the panel frame for greater dynamic, which you couldn't do in the newspaper, and began to develop the vocabulary of what the comic book could be. At the same time, the whole process of acting in comics was just emerging. Most of the guys were pure cartoonists, and a cartoonist does, I guess what IRWIN's doing now, a form of caricature, a simplicity of line where you're just using enough to hopefully capture the image of the person so that you get it. And when you look back at that first half dozen years doing characters like Green Lantern, who, despite the fact that it was a magic ring, became a very physical character as IRWIN depicted him, Wildcat, and for my personal preference, the Justice Society, where he became the first artist to pull his hair out of his head at what the editors and the writers were asking him to do, in a long line that descends to the current day. Here, IRWIN, could you just put all 10 of these guys in this panel fighting all 10 of these villains and figure out how to make it look graceful? Sort of the choreography of that, which today is a fine art.
Sheldon Mayer was our editor and wanted a new character for the comic book at that time. And he said, you were in the fight business, which I was briefly. I was illustrating drawings for a magazine called Bang Magazine. And we decided to use the cat with the claws on his feet and the image of a cat, a wildcat. And the mustache, like an animal, has the whiskers, slight whisker. And you never lost sight of the face, because the mouth and the chin were human. It's unbelievable. I created Wildcat almost 70 years ago, and here he is on television today, teaching Batman how to box.
Too slow?
Wildcat taught me how to box when I was just starting out. But he's still surprisingly tough for his age.
You'll learn the ropes one day, kid. Just keep them hands up.
The early comic books taught me the ropes of good cartooning, and like most cartoonists of mine, friends of mine, and every generation, I began my art career by doodling in my school books. I would draw pictures on the flyleaves of books, any blank page. I would do that. And my mother, God bless her, probably was the only one who saw me doing it. One day, she took me around the corner by the hand and enrolled me in the National Academy of Design. We were broke. We didn't have any money. We had just come from the Depression. I went to art school for 3 years at night, the National Academy of Design, drawing all of Michelangelo's statues with charcoal. 3 frigging years. 5 nights a week. 14 years old, whatever I was at the time. I don't quite remember the dates. My first attempt at samples was down to the Daily Worker on 14th Street. It was the communist newspaper at the time. And I took samples down there because in a phone book, that was the newspaper at the 14th Street level. I figured I'd start from 14 up to 90th. And I did a job for them, a sports cartoon. On a Sunday, I'll never forget it. And they bought it, and it became on the back page of the Daily Worker, and I went down the next week to get paid. And I stood in front of Mr. Campbell, Mr. Johnson, whoever. I said, "Sir, yes, what do you want?" He said, I did a drawing for Lester, it's printed, and I'd like to get paid. He said, "Don't you believe in the cause?" I'm 16 years old, 50, what the hell cause do I believe in? My only cause was to get paid and go uptown. He said, "Son, this is the cause. Here's 10 cents. Take the subway home." And that was my experience. The first time I ever got paid for was 10 cents. I had another semi-career in the prize fight business. I was a sports cartoonist. And that was one of my happy days, meeting gangsters, prize fight promoters. We had a small office downtown at the Forest Hotel on 49th Street.
Now, these you did when you were 17 years old?
17 years old.
God damn it.
I worked at a magazine.
Sit over here and take my place.
I haven't got time.
No, these are good.
These were, I was a kid. I worked for a magazine called Bang on 49th Street.
Bang.
Bang magazine.
Yeah, that's not going to be deleted.
That's not going to be deleted. It's not Bang Bang.
I say boxing is the greatest thing for an artist to draw. You know why? It makes his own action.
Yeah.
It makes his own action. I mean, geez, you could do anything.
Absolutely, very good.
It's the action that dictated the drawing.
That's why Mullen was
beautiful.
Great.
Oh, Mullen was the best.
The best.
He was the best at that, you know. And he just do a scribble, and there was the guy throwing a left hand.
Great. I had 2 role models, Willard Mullen, the great sports cartoonist, and Roy Crane, who created Wash Tubbs. Wash Tubbs was a little guy like me, who liked tall women like me. He and his pal, Captain Easy, had adventures in exotic places, much like those of Indiana Jones, but Roy Crane's gorgeous drawings, they were so simple. To a kid, they were cinematic. From Roy Crane, I learned that a cartoonist was a writer, director, set designer, and actor. At age 14, I decided to become a cartoonist like Roy Crane. I wanted to become a newspaper strip artist. And like most boys, I loved sports. But it was the tall guys that got to play the best positions. So I thought maybe I could become a sports cartoonist. Willard Mullen was one of my idols, the best. He created for the Brooklyn Dodgers them bums. I had to meet him. I had to meet Willard Mullen. I was a very aggressive little bastard because I took it upon myself to visit these people, these great artists. I went down to the World Telegram. I took a subway. I pushed my way into his office, and I walked right to the city room looking for Willard Mullen. I was about 14. And I visited him, and we sat and we talked. 3 weeks later, I go there again. He saw my stuff, and he's playing chess with Wilby Johnston, and he said, Irwin, you want to do me a favor? This has got to go down to 4 o'clock. Fill in the blacks. It's like a lady in a whorehouse saying, it's on me. For some reason, I had a romance for the stage. And much like the comic book characters that I would later draw, I led a double life. I would leave the house at 8 o'clock at night. My parents didn't know I left. I got on a bus, Riverside Drive, down to 14th Street, the Keith Orpheum Theater, and I went on the amateur hour circuit. I had a thing about the stage because I looked at that audience. It's like drawing comic strip almost. You got the people in the palm of your hands. Cartooning was my real thing in my life. But the stage always seemed to beckon me. Years later, I met the great Rube Goldberg. Rube was a genius cartoonist who every week would invent some crazy, impractical invention in the newspapers. Rube took a liking to me and would invite me to his summer place in the Hamptons. It was Rube Goldberg who got me inducted into the National Cartoonist Society and into the New York Society of Illustrators. The Illustrator Society was prestigious. The illustrators had little respect for cartoonists. It was only on account of Rube Goldberg that I got in, and to me this was heaven. The Illustrator Society was famed for their stage shows. Even Bob Hope would attend. Those were the greatest nights.
You know, I do, in the cartoon, I do General von Steingraber with a helmet.
Steinbrenner.
And Irwin played Steingraber.
Steingraber.
Yeah, he played him. And his first words says, "What are you doing here? This is Mein Kampf." And it was the camp was what do you call it? The
spring training.
Spring training.
Spring training, and I went like this. This is Mein Kampf.
So that got the biggest laugh.
Wonderful times. I have often walked down this street before. And the reason is that many years ago, when I worked in an office, the prize fight office, Bang magazine, in walks this short, stocky man, olive skin, all dressed in gray.
Yeah.
A gray fedora, gray hat, gray tie, this and that. And he's talking to my boss, and I'm at the typewriter. Listen to this. As he's walking out, he turns around and looks at me. This is Frankie Carbo. Turns around and he says, "Billy, the kid's got pimples. Get him laid." There's a prize fighter sitting on the couch. Izzy Singer, his name was, from Philadelphia. And he hung out at the office. I hang around her. So my boss takes out a $10 bill and gives it to Izzy and said, "Take the kid uptown." Izzy Singer gets a hold of me, reluctantly takes me by the hand, takes me into the subway on Broadway, up here to this building, 92nd Street, and takes me into the lobby, rings the buzzer in the elevator, goes up to the 6th floor, and a door opens, and a woman dressed in a kimono looks out at me and says, "What's this?" And Izzy Singer says, "Billy wants to get him fixed up." I walk in, and I didn't know where the hell I was. There were 3 girls sitting at a table. That's all I saw. Anyway, to make a long story short, that was the beginning of my life as a man. I shared it with my peers. The next day, I ran up to my neighborhood here on 110th Street. They were all playing cards, and I go in there and I say, "You son of a bitches, I'm the first one to get laid." I did it. I am the first one, you bastards. In their own way, all of my friends are geniuses. Jules Pfeiffer used to visit my studio as a kid. He'd show up dressed in knickers and sit on my windowsill and want to know all about cartooning. He grew up drawing wonderful cartoons for the Village Voice, writing books, Broadway shows, and movie screenplays. He was a genius.
Everyone open the door.
Come on, I got lox and cream. Lox and cream cheese.
Oh, Mr. God.
Or scotch.
You had always an energy and an in-your-face brashness or directness, which was I always loved.
That's why tall women always liked me.
And I've heard that rumor, and I heard it from you actually. I just thought you were, among all of these people who looked alike, an individual.
Thank you. That's the nicest thing you could have said to me.
It's,
you got something more to say in that vein?
No, so I'm going home now.
Okay. I was finishing up my work in a sports genre, the prize fight business. And I walked around the corner with my samples to the comic book industry, which has become just the beginning. It was its beginning. And I got in on the ground floor, as they say. And in no time, I became fast friends with editor Sheldon Mayer.
I think some 63 years ago, I was a kid with Frank Giacoya. We were trying to sell a lot of work at DC Comics. And Shirley was very sweet. He said, "Let me see the work." And we sat there. We're both very nervous, young kids, And he's looking at the work, and look, all of a sudden I hear the door open behind me, and we hear, "On guard." And I say, "This is IRWIN Hasen walking in with a T-square." Shelley drops the pages, picks up his, and they start dueling all around the room. Over the desk, back and forth, behind us, dropping stuff. I'm looking at Frankie, what the hell did we get into here? Then they do this for about 20 minutes, the two of them. And then IRWIN Hasen stops. He kisses Shelley on both cheeks, leaves, and goes back to his drawing board. Shelley goes back and picks up the pages like nothing happened. I said, "Frank, let's get the hell out of here. This is dreadful. I can't take this."
Shelley had me do most of all of the early Green Lantern covers, and I created Green Lantern sidekick Doby Dickles. The emphasis for the covers was always an action. When I was inducted into the Army in Fort Dix, 1942, I was smart enough, little guy, to look for the newspaper office, because I was limited service, and I became the editor of the Fort Dix Reception Center Gazette. So all of my talents I put together in the Army. Limited service, because I just got in by the skin of my teeth. I was 5'2". I couldn't reach the trigger of the rifle.
Are you willing to undertake a dangerous mission behind the enemy lines, knowing you may never return alive?
Did you ever notice the name IRWIN signed in a fancy flourish on the covers of those kid comic books? You know, all about moon men chasing the Earthmen into the stratosphere. Well, that's me, IRWIN Hasen. I'm a little guy, about 5'4". Before the war, I loved flashy ties and babies. Girl babies, about 21.
But working at the Fort Dix Gazette was a wonderful experience for me. I was my own boss and did everything from writing to typesetting to cartooning and even delivering the newspapers. It was exhausting. However, there were certain fringe benefits. I'm proud of what I did there. But then in 1944, the Army sent me back to New York. My mother was dying. And here was my dilemma. All my life, I had a hard time getting close to my mother. Most of you guys kissed your mother, perhaps. I could never do that. Since childhood, I had known my mother had been having an affair with my father's best friend, Simon. And that scarred me with other women. My mother was dying. I got into bed with my mother in my uniform. She never knew I was there. And the only time I ever held her in my arms and kissed her, and mother, and I said, Irwin, it's Irwin. And she kept saying, where's my Irwin? Where's my Irwin? The next day, I went to the hospital for the last rites. And all she said, her last words, take care of my Irwin. So this never left me, possibly why I never married. Only when she died did I hold her in my arms. Bullshit, you know, too late, too late.
Never, 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 never will I marry. Never, never will I wed. Born to wander solitary, wide my world, narrow my bed. Never, never, never will I marry. Born to wander till I'm dead. No burdens to bear, no conscience, no care, no memories to mourn, no turning, for I was born to wander solitary. Wide my
I dated once or twice, and most of them, they were ladies of the evening. In those days, you were nice, sweet Jewish kids, and we didn't know from dating. You either got married right away, or you just hung out. So I had experiences never to the point of even close into my 90s with getting married. These days, I enjoy going out to a bar with my friends. Or I stay here at home. My apartment came with a huge bar. And I've learned to make a damn good martini. Extra dry, just a whisper of vermouth. There's just something very refined about it. A well-made martini.
Oh, hello. Well, to say that I have words for my amazement, I have not. Where do you think I just came from?
After World War II ended, I had a call from my friend Jerry Robinson. Jerry had created Batman's nemesis, the Joker. He's a damn good artist, by the way. Jerry told me that the New York Post was looking for a cartoonist to draw the new Goldberg strip. The Goldbergs was a popular radio and then TV show of the time and starred its creator, Gertrude Berg. It was about a typical New York Jewish family. At last, it was my dream come true. A newspaper strip. And can you imagine, with my personal family life in disarray, here I am asked to draw a typical Jewish family. Yet working in the office of the New York Post was the greatest thrill of my life. The clatter of typewriters, the bustling excitement of the office, shouts of copy, copy. Unfortunately, in 1946, after 1 year, the strip ended. Maybe it had been too progressive to feature a Jewish family in a newspaper comic strip. We appeared in only one paper, and having made no money, we were canceled. However, it was a terrific experience. Later that year, as I left my newspaper family, I returned to my comic book family, DC Comics. Soon, I was back to work with the Green Lantern, the Flash, All-Star Comics, and my newest assignment, the regular cover artist for Wonder Woman. Shelley knew, I think, that I loved drawing tall, statuesque women, and even go out with a few. And on every cover, the Amazon princess battled a plethora of thugs, pirates, space aliens, and 3D monsters. But after the war, times changed.
The real question is this: are comic books good or are they not good?
They were destroying comics. They said children would be destroyed, kids were jumping off rooftops, killing themselves, drugs, women, sex, violence. They blamed every syndrome, every problem in the world on comic books. And the comics got slaughtered. And we were people who were doing these things. And we'd be ashamed to even tell people we did them. As I said, that's the reason I use pseudonyms for myself. And the other guys did too. We didn't know from day to day whether it be work or not work, you know. You ate, you didn't eat. It was a tough life. I think Superman and Batman, the only things that survived at the time. But even they were hurt very badly.
The superhero books began to lose money. As a result, a lot of cartoonists lost their jobs. In 1950, in fact, I lost mine.
He was told at DC Comics he should take a vacation as they were hiring his kids. And he thought it was a wonderful idea. When he got out, I think it was the Queen Elizabeth, the guy found out he was fired.
I went to Israel, and that's when I became Jewish. That's when I knew I was Jewish. Because when I went to Jerusalem, the cab driver dropped me off at the top of the mountain. You look down in Jerusalem, and you see the light from the sky, and all of a sudden I started to cry. And I said to the driver, I said, his name is Svi. All the drivers are named Svi in Israel. Svi. I said, Svi, why am I crying? He said, Mr. Hazen, they all cry. And that's when I became a Jew. As simple as that. Back in the States and being out of work, my friends at the National Cartoonist Society got me on a USO tour to entertain the troops. Again, my two loves, the stage and cartooning. In 1952, a bunch of us were sent back overseas to Germany. And yes, Virginia, there was a Holocaust. One night I slept in a German general's bed. He wasn't in it. I would have been in an ashtray in the morning. And then we went to Dachau. And that's where we got the shock. Gus Edson and I were the only Jews among the cartoonists. And Gus Edson and I, the only Jews, came back on the bus, didn't say a word, and we got back to Berlin and we all got drunk. And it was quite an experience. And one moment of the trip, Gus said to me, "Are you doing anything? What are you doing?" "About my work." When you're broke and you're out of work, you say you're in advertising. So I said, "I'm doing some advertising work." I hadn't done any work in 4 years. So he said, "But would you be interested in doing something?" This comes to the end of my life where I became not an itinerant, but a star. He sends me a picture of Dondi when we got back to New York. The picture is like this. There's the picture. It was not as ornate. It was on Waldorf Astoria stationery, black and white. And I looked at the picture and I said, "Gus," I called him up. I said, "Gus, this is going to be the best strip in America. It's like looking across a crowded room, seeing a woman and saying that's going to be my wife."
Little Dondi, all the world's sunny joy stored in one little boy. That's Dondi, little Dondi. There's no one else like you.
I did this right at the very beginning. 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 10 hours a day. The premise was a little war orphan, an Italian war orphan. That's what Gus told me. And I said, that's great. And he said, you're kidding? He didn't even know what he had. So anyway, we did about 6 weeks, which took almost a year without pay. And there's no such thing as upfront money in those days. In other words, the syndicate says you're lucky to be alive. You're lucky that we're even thinking about it. Dondi snuck aboard a Liberty ship with his GI buddies to America. And he got in a duffel bag on the ship, hid in a duffel bag, came to America, looked for his buddies, couldn't find them. He wandered the streets of New York. A cop picked him up. I can say that honestly, that I had to drive, to whatever reason, to do a comic strip. So God gave me that chance. And I'm not religious, but I just want to cover all bases. To watch the first trucks roll with a big poster of Dondi sitting on a duffel bag. That was being famous. I sat there and looked at that truck with Gus Edson. We both were standing on a corner of 42nd Street. And he said, we got 400 papers. We had 300, whatever. We have 300, 400 newspapers. And I'm looking at that truck, at this. I didn't give a goddamn how many papers we had. We were famous. And then after the strip went on for about another couple of weeks, we contacted the State Department. And we got an edict, an act of Congress should allow Dondi to be a citizen. We had to split it 3 ways, Gus and me and the syndicate. So there wasn't that much of a big windfall. And also I was lucky just to be alive and have a strip. I just come from the unemployment lines, as it were, regarding my work. And now it took a year to make a living without making a penny. So to me, money never seemed to be the driving force in my life. As a result of his popularity, Dondi became attracted to Hollywood. And Gus Edson had a friend, and he said, we have a movie being made. I said, that's nice. Who's going to be the producer? He said, there's nothing to do with you. Don't worry about it. And then I knew I was. And I said, what about me? God, I'd like to go to Hollywood. He said, Irwin, you know what? You're going to have to pay your own way. He said, you want to spend them? I looked at him. I said, Gus, I'm your partner. I'm not. And in his mind, you're not my partner. You're a schmuck cartoonist who I got to get. And I shut up. Anyway, I went to Hollywood. I paid my way. This is a sad story. It's a rotten story. It's a terrible story because he did everything behind my back and he put me in that movie, which I am a police artist. And I did a drawing of Dondi when he was lost in America. Do a drawing of Dondi. Gus drove home in a white Lincoln Continental car, plus whatever he got from the movie. There was a lot of merchandising, and they put out dolls, they put out belts, they put out everything. And gosh, as Dondi would say, gosh, misters, why didn't you tell me about the merchandising? One perk I did get was a trip to Miami. I was asked to be a judge for the Miss Universe competition that year in 1960. It was to help promote the release of the Dondi movie. And they asked for me.
Just a
select the most beautiful girl in the universe, we are fortunate in having with us tonight a distinguished panel of judges. They're busy with their balloting, but let's interrupt them for a brief bow.
I met a very beautiful lady, very tall. And I told her, by the way, I'm going to be introduced, and I'm going to throw you a kiss.
A new Miss Universe, we are apt to forget
Sure enough, when I got up
that
to be introduced, I went like this in the audience.
Mr. IRWIN Hasen, whose comic strip character Dondi is seen in over 125 newspapers in the United States and abroad. Mr. IRWIN Hasen.
Nothing ever happened with us. But I took a shot at it. We asked all the guys to come and watch the opening. IRWIN Hasen, Dondi, you know. And it was so embarrassing when I sat in that audience. You know how you go like this? This is a Dondi expression. Let's talk turkey, shall we? Dear audience, I'd like to interrupt my documentary for a moment, if I may. You know, making a movie ain't easy when you're 92 years old. And just thinking about that rotten turkey of a Dondi movie should be making me lose my appetite. But a starving artist has to eat. Well, you know, I'm in a bit of a pickle. But as it happens, the movie studio that currently owns the rights to the Dondi movie now wants to charge me $20,000 in order to include clips and even stills into my documentary. Hey, perhaps if the studio had paid me in the first place, you know, I'd be able to afford to pay them. Actually, not showing that Dondi movie spares you, the audience, the agita you'd get from sitting through it. Anyway, lunch is over. Let's get back to work on my documentary. Oh, and Hollywood, now I'd like to give you the bird.
Dondi was just this little kid who was kind of nice, and everybody came to like him because he was nice, and he had his adventures, and you know, and it pulled at the heartstrings. It was such a simple face, and I guess the thing is, then you can see that in that face, anything that you want to see, because it's just like a kind of a button eyes and nose and so forth, and just this wonderful look of the orphan kid, you know, just the ultimate innocent, and your heart just wants to go out to a character like that.
Most of the fans, the old lady fans, the middle-aged women and mothers and everything would say to me, whenever I would go to a signing or whatever, "My God, you did Dondi? Those beautiful eyes." All they wore are little black dots. The beautiful eyes were only part of the eyebrows, because with those eyebrows, I manipulated every movement of that kid's face, which I do in my own life. When I want my friends to do things for me, fix light bulbs, like Dan McCara does, I go like this. "Hi, Dan, would you do me a favor and reach that light bulb?" And that's my Dondi eye, the shtick. It's called a shtick, because that's the way you put your head on a slant, which I did with Dondi. "Hi, Mrs. McGowan."
The continuity reads like one of those graphic novels of today. It doesn't date. It's got great charm. It's wonderful narrative, great storytelling, and wonderful art.
I really enjoyed Dondi when I was a child. I used to read it through the Daily News, and I always thought he was like the reverse of Little Orphan Annie. He had the black eyes, and she had no eyes. But what made me always curious was, as I grew older, was like, why didn't Dondi age with me? So I think that's when I jumped to Brenda Starr as a woman with a career. So inadvertently, it led me into comics. I've been a comic letterer for the past 3 decades. So it was an important part of my life now that I look back. Dondi, I'll always look upon with affection, the little boy.
It's great that it lasted such a long time and is still remembered and collected today.
I relate to Dondi as after the war more than I related to Beetle Bailey, who was in uniform all
That's
the time.
interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, because Dondi had a fresh approach coming over from another country and establishing the American dream, you know.
The story of Dondi is about the American dream. Some people ask me why Dondi was an Italian orphan, but that didn't matter. Dondi could have just as easily been German or Jewish, Arab, or anything in America. Everybody has a chance, but you gotta work your tail off.
Dondi, I fell in love with Dondi right away. It was a great strip. Why it's not running today? It could be.
It should have been. It could have been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Well, Beetle Bailey for crying out.
Yeah.
But that, I mean, Gasoline Alley. Dondi could have grown up to, you know, to be a.
He couldn't have grown up. I didn't grow up. Why should Dondi grow up?
No, but it could have. It should have been. I don't know.
I know, but
I don't know why it was canceled. Why was it canceled?
I think the Daily News finally didn't like it.
Why?
I don't know why. Nobody ever told us.
Well, who killed it?
Somebody at the news. Well, the news was our biggest client at that time.
Yeah.
And then we lost papers. It just fell out of favor. You know, after 30 years, new editors come in, new advertising and all that.
They do.
A lot of it, you know. First of all, when it stopped, I felt okay. I didn't feel bad.
Yeah, why?
It wasn't making a lot of money.
Oh, I see.
Very little money for the work I had to put in. That's the reason.
Plus, you got your run, didn't you?
I had my 30 years. Jesus.
It was very popular.
Absolutely. I had no complaints.
Yeah.
I don't care if it... And also, it gave me another... I started to teach. Very good.
Thank you.
Nice layouts. I like the way you design the layouts with the black.
Actually,
I never do that. Go ahead.
Jason actually penciled it.
Penciled it? Really?
I inked it for him.
Good. I taught at Joe Kubert School of Cartoon Art for nearly 30 years. I began while I was still doing Dondi, and then 22 years after Dondi ended. And Joe Kubert, who runs the school, what a great guy, and a great artist. He's been my friend since my comic book days and back at DC Comics.
That's a wild place also. That convention gets wilder and wilder.
I heard last year was like 60,000 people.
Yeah.
I'm a little leery of that, really.
So what do you think about going to these comic book conventions, Irwin?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I make a couple of bucks, tax-free. Keep this off the record. Jesus. The conventions are great. I've been all over the world attending them. San Diego, Charlotte, North Carolina, even Italy. They love comics in Europe, by the way. I get to meet the fans who I love dearly. I always run into my old students, some from years and years ago, and it's strange. Comic fans remember me more today for my comic book stuff. The Wildcat, Wonder Woman, etc., etc. Then they remember Dondi. And I'm not complaining. The magic I found in comics years ago, new generations are now discovering today. My fantasy was to have a woman saying, "Darling, dinner is on the table. Darling, here's your eggs for breakfast." And a cottage and then in the country and the flowers. That was my fantasy. In my life, I've been lucky to have been able to do the work that I've loved. I've been lucky to have had the best of friends to have enjoyed the company of some truly wonderful, beautiful women. And I'm lucky. I still want to dance.
I'm in a dancing mood, a gay romancing mood, whenever I'm with you. The music seems brighter, the troubles are lighter too, when I'm with you.
I'm in a merry mood, a light and airy mood, whenever you are near. I feel like a feather when we dance together, dear. So let me hear, I want to hear a rhythm that has a trick in it.
Hot music that's got a kick in it. It's really heavenly, the way you follow me.
You seem to know my mood.
You know how to chime in when I'm in a dancing mood.